Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new show for the Autosport YouTube channel that's going to see Alex and I rank the driver performance of every Grand Prix of the 2020 season. Now, the first Grand Prix, the opener, was quite an event. I don't know if anybody quite expected the show that was the F1 put on for us this weekend. And obviously there were a lot of DNFs and only 11 drivers finished the Grand Prix, but that hasn't stopped us from being able to rank them. Alex, what were your initial takes on that Grand Prix?
I was just like, this is. I mean, I've covered many races for Autosport before. I used to cover Formula E, so I'm not unfamiliar with mad races. But in terms of my Formula One debut, there was a moment where I thought, not sure I could have picked a more eventful race if I'd tried, but there we go.
Before we dive into the individual drivers, I think it's important that we just outline what this scoring system is based on before people start jumping down our throats about any discrepancies or lack of methodology. So there is method behind our madness. So let's go through the scoring system. So all drivers are going to be rated for their performance through the whole weekend, with the focus mainly being on qualifying in the race. But it's important to note that this is not just race performance, it's entire weekend performance. So a number 10, if a driver is rated number 10, that means exceptional performance, maximising the result, and either through overturning a major obstacle or dominance over rivals, excelling in all areas. Number 9. If a driver gets a number 9, it means outstanding performance, but without quite reaching the heights required for a maximum score. Number 8. Very good performance with no major errors and a final result that, relative to circumstances, reflected the car's pace. 7. Good performance, perhaps one that's a little inconsistent in some aspects, or without extracting the maximum from a car, but still yields a reasonable result. 6. Solid performance, but without getting the most out of the car or nailing it when it really mattered. 5. Patchy performance, not necessarily off the pace, but failing to string together the weekend well and coming away short of a good result. 4. Disappointing performance, failing to get close to the maximum of the car and making mistakes at key moments. 3. Poor performance, either through struggling to get the most out of the car or through some massive error falling short. 2. Very poor performance, with mediocre pace and mistakes adding up to a wasted weekend. 1. Terrible, a performance with no redeeming features. So why don't we dive straight in, and we're going to do this in reverse finishing order, just so that we can get those DNFs out of the way, because as we've said, we don't have a lot to go on to be able to score them. But let's start with our first victim of the Grand Prix, which was Max Verstappen. But Alex, what have you given Mr. Max Verstappen?
So Max Verstappen earns a 9 here, which I've said might be a little bit harsh on Verstappen, given he didn't really make any mistakes at the key moments in the weekend. He did exactly what, the gap looked quite big from Red Bull to Mercedes on the Friday. It did close up as expected in qualifying. And he got Red Bull to exactly where it's going to be. He put it third in qualifying, obviously promoted to second by Lewis Hamilton's penalty. And then, managed to resist Lando Norris in the early laps. And, as you say, we were robbed of a potential great strategy move. Like the whole, obviously the Red Bull falling out, having gone through all that effort to get him through Q2 was particularly cruel for them. But then the safety cars later on in the race meant that it wasn't a real strategic game. It was more about opportunity and sort of, seat of the moment tactics. But potentially a little bit harsh on Verstappen, given he didn't do much wrong. But as we'll come on to later, there are reasons why other drivers earned 10 out.
Because I guess that's the other thing as well. We're comparing them against one another. It's not just kind of an objective, this is your score. It has to be kind of weighted against the other driver performance. So, I think a 9 is pretty fair for Max, actually. But as we said, we'll come on to maybe why that's not a 10 whilst we get a little bit further up the grid. So the next driver to drop like a fly was Daniel Ricciardo, who, again, didn't really get going, really, did he?
No, he'd done very well to get into Q3, and as we'll come on to, booted Sebastian Vettel out of Q2. Lost the position at the start, so I did mark him down for that, considering he'd worked so hard just to get into that spot to immediately lose at the beginning, which again you could probably make the case that's a bit harsh. But he really did well in qualifying, which is why he was up there in the points so highly. But yeah, cooling problem hampered his car, put it into a safe mode, and he retired. And as I made a note for my my report, or this equivalent feature in Autosport magazine this week, he does have a weird problem with season openers, doesn't he, Daniel Ricciardo? If he's not losing podium finishes on his debut for Red Bull, it's like last year where he had the wing come off in Australia at the start. So yeah, first race blues strike again for Ricciardo.
So poor season, bad luck aside, what are we giving Daniel Ricciardo for this race?
So for all those reasons outlined, 7 for Daniel Ricciardo.
7. That's probably quite fair. I think I probably agree with that. So the next driver was somebody that I just didn't really, this is going to sound really harsh, I didn't really notice in the race. Like, it was kind of like oh yeah, you're still here. But obviously didn't stay here for long, but I think that was down to a lot of the technical difficulties, the reliability issues that we were seeing up and down the grid. And that's a certain Mr. Lance Stroll, who you've given a 6 out of 10.
But yeah, Stroll gets a 6 because, like you said, Jess, it was quite underwhelming, really. And we're going to come on to talk about Sergio Perez, later on, obviously. But that Racing Point is probably, I've got my list down here. If you just want to see, I've got a very detailed thing of notes to get me through this video. Racing Point, the third fastest car on merit, and where Stroll qualified, it was well off. I mean, Perez as well, as we'll come to, underwhelmed in qualifying. And again, just didn't really seem to go anywhere in the race. Yeah, he was unlucky with the fact he had a reliability problem, but because he was, again, a significant chunk behind his teammate who had already underperformed the car, that's why Stroll, in my book, gets a 6.
Okay, so let's keep going. Kevin Magnussen, and you're giving him a 7 out of 10 for his performance.
Yeah, Magnussen earns a 7 out of 10. I mean, yeah, he actually had a pretty good race. He bounced back from being beaten by Grosjean in qualifying, but he shot forwards at the start, jumped up to 13th at the end of the first lap, and was actually going towards the points even before all the chaos and all the madness started, because it was him that started it. It was his brake failure as he was being attacked by Esteban Ocon that pitched him out of the race. So yeah, so from what we saw of him in the race, good one from Magnussen.
Okay, so Haas teammate, Romain Grosjean, you've ranked lower than Magnussen and given him a 6. Why is that?
Yeah, again, very close in the fact that they both retired early through, problems that weren't their fault. He did beat Magnussen into Q2, but he went backwards at the start. And also he went off into turn 4, unforced error early on, and then that was at the same spot later in the race where he has a recurring brake issue. He's able to limp back to the pits. But yeah, just for the fact that his good qualifying performance to get into Q2, but just because of the way Magnussen had sort of trumped him in the race, that's why he gets the lower score.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And I think I tweeted this during the race, but good to know that some things don't change, and we got a Grosjean pirouette partway through a race. So the next driver is actually probably one of the first heartbreak moments, I think. And that was George Russell, who you've given a 9 out of 10, which is a really high score.
Very high score. I mean, you could make the case that he deserves a 10, but I thought that just because he didn't improve on his final lap in Q1, I felt that just cost him a perfect score there. I mean, yeah, Williams felt he had the pace to get into Q2 if everything had been perfect. Obviously, it just wasn't quite. Things didn't fall his way. So bit of sympathy there, but yeah, he didn't improve, and that's why he doesn't get a 10. In the race, he was driving very well. He felt he didn't have the same pace in terms of being able to fight the Alfa Romeos and the Hasses in the race, but he was on for points, considering it was all so chaotic, but a fuel pressure problem cost George Russell there. He retired, caused another safety car, and yeah, as you say, Jess, the first real bit of heartbreak in the race, because he could have been on for his first ever F1 points. Yeah,
it would have been great to see, and it would have been so good for Williams. Now, up next is someone that had quite a dramatic exit from the Grand Prix because his wheel and tyre went flying, and that's Kimi Raikkonen, who's getting a 6 from you, Alex.
He is, yeah. I mean, it looked initially, I thought he'd crashed into the pit wall, and I had no idea how he'd done it. But then obviously it was revealed that the wheel had flown off. Cross-threaded wheel nut meant that the wheel wasn't on properly. Alfa Romeo get fined for that. Yeah, Raikkonen gets a 6 here, which, potentially a little bit harsh, but he was firmly behind Giovinazzi, obviously who's significantly less experienced, and he couldn't stay with him in the race. Giovinazzi had a good battling drive, but Raikkonen's never really showed anything, and he was almost rooted to the back whether he could have got amongst it, with the fresher tyres. Obviously, that was the stop that just before the end where, that's why the wheel ends up falling off. We never got the chance to see it, but just wasn't a particularly strong day for Raikkonen.
Now, Alex and I are going through our official rankings, but we obviously want to know what you think. Do you agree with the rankings that we've been giving these drivers so far? Obviously, it's quite a difficult one to give for retirees, but let us know in the comments if you're agreeing. Also, head over to autosport.com where you can actually rank the drivers yourself, and we'll see in the next episode whether or not they matched up with ours. Now, moving on, we are now getting to somebody that had a brilliant race to start off with, and then it all came tumbling or spinning away from him, and that is the Red Bull of Alex Albon. Now, number 8 here, Alex.
Yeah, it's an 8, Jess, because he was so far off Max Verstappen in qualifying, nearly 4/10 off his teammate in the same car. Obviously, we know how good Max Verstappen is, but that's still a big chunk that he's giving away. And crucially, he got out-qualified by Lando Norris. And again, great lap by Norris, but that McLaren is not a quicker car than the Red Bull. So that's why Albon has to be marked down. The incident with Lewis Hamilton, I haven't marked him down for, but the more you think about, really, if you're going to go around the outside of someone, you are putting yourself at risk. And he had such a tyre advantage at the end of the race that he potentially could have waited a little bit longer. I know Christian Horner felt, well, the Mercedes would have got their hards warmed up, so he had to attack immediately. But given the amount of laps that they'd done on those tyres, potentially, he had a bit more time in his pocket. The thing about Albon is I get why a lot of people, it was a really positive race performance, don't get me wrong, but he didn't deserve to win that race on merit. Valtteri Bottas did, Lewis Hamilton arguably did. It was only that the circumstances put him in that position. Heartbreaking that he didn't get a podium, heartbreaking that he didn't get a win. I get that, but no, that's why it's not higher than 8 for me.
Next up is Daniel Kvyat, who didn't quite make it, but he comes in at with a number 7 from you, Alex.
No, he certainly didn't make it on the TV. He sort of did surf the chaos quite well, but the reason why he's marked down, as we'll come on to later, for his teammate Pierre Gasly, is because he was the slower AlphaTauri in qualifying and ended up being behind in the race, which he failed to finish. He's classified in the results, but it was a dramatic sort of tyre blowout, suspension failure at the end. And he says that this happened in a clash with Esteban Ocon during the late stages. And I have seen the incident which I think he's referring to, because it's not very clear what goes on, really. It doesn't look as if there's actually any contact, or there isn't any definitive contact, but Kvyat and AlphaTauri in their press release were pretty they weren't mincing their words. They were firmly blaming Ocon for what happened there.
Now, next up was again another Williams with a shot at a point, but didn't quite deliver. Now, this was his first Grand Prix for the rookie Nicholas Latifi, but I did just think that shot was there for him, and he just didn't quite do enough to secure that point for Williams, did he? So you've given him a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, Latifi, unfortunate in that there were enough cars in front of him that scooped up all the points paying positions, but he was never in position to get ahead of any of them. He would have been firmly last had all things played out normally, as it were. He was actually lapped by lap 25. He gets it back because of the safety cars. So yeah, not a high profile, eye catching debut, but still did well to make it to the end in what was a bizarre race.
Next up, I think, is going to be the first ranking that I am going to hugely disagree with you on. But Sebastian Vettel, you've given a 4. But I guess when you compare him against his teammate, who ended up on the podium, it does, again, in reflection and comparison, it does look quite bad for Vettel, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time of writing and the time of recording, I'm not aware of any Ferrari given any particular issue for that handling problem that he had. Yeah, he did reference it, he did explain it, but he just said he had no confidence in the car, and that's fine, that's understandable. But as you say, Leclerc utterly maximised his result with second place. Vettel as well booted out in Q2. That car should have been in Q3. I mean, it isn't a great Ferrari, as we know, unfortunately, with its engine problems, with the fact it's draggy at the moment and lack of updates. But getting beaten by Daniel Ricciardo does bring his score down there. And then the spin with Carlos Sainz, it's yet another Vettel mistake. It's another one. It's just a run of issues that he's having. Yeah, I do have sympathy if he had serious car problems. Another driver who wasn't very confident in his car was Carlos Sainz, and he finished 5th. So for that reason, that's why I've got Vettel down so low on 4 there.
Okay. All right. Someone that didn't have like a particularly great race, but I guess just did what they could to finish where they did was Giovinazzi, who we've given a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, just I think you're being a bit harsh on him there. He was in amongst the battles. He made things work that he needed to do. Beat Kimi Raikkonen, beat him comfortably in qualifying. So maybe, we're just seeing the first signs of that progress of him coming out of his rookie year, maybe establishing himself at Alfa Romeo, who, we'll see as the season goes on. But yeah, great start at the start, obviously. And yeah, just took advantage of the chaos and got two good points.
Esteban Ocon in that Renault. It wasn't a great race for him. It wasn't a great well, it's not really a debut, is it? Because obviously he's raced before, but his debut for Renault, 6 out of 10. I think I'm gonna have to be inclined to agree with that, because it wasn't. He just didn't look like he was gonna do anything with that car, did he?
No, it was quite surprising actually, considering how much we rate him and how good we know Ocon is. Obviously, yeah, he's been out of Formula One for a long time, so they have some sympathy. Again, didn't have the smoothest of practice sessions. The Renault were working on the car, looking at something on the car at the end of FP3, which is obviously crucial for getting your eye in ahead of qualifying. But yeah, that was where it all started to unravel really for Ocon, because he ended up qualifying behind both AlphaTauri cars, which is a slower car. So that's where we have to take the rankings into effect. And again, he slipped back at the start, did get back to the points, but still finished behind one of the AlphaTauris, and potentially might have finished behind the other one if Kvyat's move had come off at the end. So yeah, a disappointing F1 return for Esteban Ocon.
This next ranking, Alex, shocked me to my very core.
Good.
You've given Pierre Gasly a 10 out of 10. It's our first 10 out of 10 of the season. And it's to Gasly, who had a bit of a shocker last season. You've given him top score coming into 2020.
Yeah, I mean, he's made the perfect start. Again, like his teammate, wasn't really seen. But that doesn't mean he wasn't putting in a good race. This P7 in an AlphaTauri in a race of chaos is fantastic. I mean, again, okay, it's not the second place he achieved in Brazil, but that was because there was still a significant number of the leaders that that made it to the end in this race. The reason why Gasly does so well, and we're going to come on to this later when we talk about Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, is that he actually had a pretty major brake problem. And his team had said as early as lap 10, we think you should retire the car, or we're thinking about retiring the car here. So the fact that he made it to the end on what is a brutal track at the Red Bull Ring, as we saw with the Mercedes cars, the fact that he beat his teammate in qualifying, maximised his points, beat Ocon again in the faster Renault as we covered before, that's why for me he deserves a 10.
Next up, somebody that I was expecting a lot more of, Sergio Perez.
Yeah, Sergio Perez, 6 out of 10. Again, like his teammate, like I said, we know how quick that car is now. We've seen it. He's the third quickest car. We know that it's heavily influenced by the Mercedes W10 of last year. And it's so fast. And Perez underperformed in qualifying. Norris ahead of him. Albon, yeah, I mean, he's there for the taking, really, when you think about his gap to Verstappen. But the problem with Perez mainly was the errors that he made in the race. He did make positive progress. He was in the hunt for the podium at the end, and I've got to give him credit for that. It looked like we were going to have a classic Sergio Perez driver when he went onto the mediums when everybody else took the hards at the first pit stop. But yeah, just towards the end, errors crept in. There was the rather unforgivable one of the pit lane speeding. It's a slam dunk, really. It wasn't much, only about 1 kilometre an hour over the limit, but he's done there. And then there's a mistake when Alex Albon nips past just before the Kimi Raikkonen safety car. I know there's a split second timing in it, but it's Perez locking up and goes wide that lets the Red Bull get through. Maybe he would have got past anyway with his tyre advantage later on, but whatever, it's another Perez error. And then again, left the door open for Charles Leclerc. I mean, it was a pretty wild, brave move from Leclerc, and actually relied on Perez a little bit not having a proper accident, but he gets mugged there, really. And then it's even worse when it comes to Norris. Again, yeah, there is contact at the apex, and you could say it's probably 50-50. He left the door open and Norris went into the gap. But yeah, again, just maybe could have been a bit more aware in everything that was going on. So for that reason, but more than anything else, because we know how good that car is, and the fact that early on in the season, with that advantage, Racing Point needs to be picking up the podiums. If they come away from Austria without a podium, they'll be really disappointed. At the moment, they should be really pleased because they know their car is really good. But the podium was there for the taking and he missed it, I think.
Carlos Sainz gets an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, 8 out of 10 for Sainz. Now, this is the difference as we go back to Vettel earlier, in that Sainz was also very unhappy with his car's handling. Team principal Andreas Seidel said, that he wasn't pleased with it, and yet he still comes away with a 5th place finish. That's tremendous. Tremendous. It's almost that cliche of football teams. It's like you win the titles on your bad days. If you can get a draw or get a win even when you're playing badly, that's really positive. I think that sort of applies here with Sainz. But the difference between his mark to Lando Norris, which I won't give away yet, but we'll come to in a minute, was because Norris beat him, and also he got out qualified by Leclerc. Now it's very, very close on pace between the McLaren and the Ferrari, but it did just look like Leclerc was there for the taking there.
Next up, though, is somebody that had just a bit of a strange weekend, really. A lot of attention, obviously, around him for reasons both on and off track. But that's Lewis Hamilton, who had basically just a string of penalties. He had 2 major penalties against him. You've given him a 7 out of 10. Why?
Yeah, it's 7 out of 10 because I think he did make mistakes this weekend, and they did prove to be pretty damn costly. When there's a car off the track, there's going to be yellow flags, surely. I mean, I get the competitive instinct, the fact that you want to keep going, and if you're going by, what you can see, he sees a green flag, he goes to it, fine. But when that there's an incident, you're in dangerous territory, and he perhaps ultimately pays the price for not being conservative, because when the penalty comes out, it puts him down in the pack. He's chasing Bottas when he might have been leading the race had he started higher up. But Bottas was faster on the first run in Q3, and Hamilton wasn't. And even when he kept his foot in on his final lap, he still ended up second. So yes, that's the first, and I think probably arguably larger error, even though the other one is sort of more high profile, and that is the incident with Albon. Really close, actually, much closer than I initially thought, sort of looking back. I think, I get it why Hamilton thinks it's a racing incident. I also get why Albon's absolutely furious, and it's just the fact that the Red Bull was so far ahead when the contact is made. That's why I think you've just got to give it to Lewis Hamilton, but it certainly wasn't as clear cut as perhaps it first looked.
Now, next up, we've got another 10 out of 10 for a really incredible drive from Lando Norris, especially that final lap. That was something pretty magic, wasn't it?
It was, and so the reason why we're gonna link back to Gasly and link forward to Charles Leclerc in a moment is the fact that there was just something extra special that makes the difference between a 9 and 10 for Lando Norris, because he himself was like, I made a few mistakes, I made a few errors, that's why I was running 5th and then had to come back at the end. But that final lap, to get your first Formula 1 podium, to deprive Lewis Hamilton of a podium, it's the fastest lap when he needed to at the last gasp. He did it by 0.1 seconds. That's why Lando Norris earns a 10. Plus, he was already the star of qualifying. He qualified 4th. That McLaren shouldn't have been 4th on the grid. It's a great car, the McLaren, but it's not. That's not where it is. I think he outperformed it. So that's why Lando Norris, for me, earns a 10. And just fantastic to see. Fantastic to see a new face on the podium. Well done to him. It was brilliant. He was in the press conference again. He said he got so much champagne into his face mask that he had to actually ask for another one because it was almost being glued to his mouth. He said he couldn't breathe and answer the questions properly. So yeah, that's that extra amazing bit at the end gets him a 10.
Now, Charles Leclerc, you've also given a 10 out of 10. I'm not sure if that is a 10. I think it'd be like a 9.5 from me personally, but we don't deal in half points. So if we're looking at everybody that you've given 10 out of 10s, why does Leclerc also get a 10?
Well, I mean, no, just as you said, we can't do half points in driver ratings. It's the same way we have a rule at Autosport when we do our rankings of drivers in every championship at the end of the year. You can't put anyone level because, it's down to you. You've got to make a call here. You've got to find out what it is. So Leclerc gets a 10 because, as you said, that Ferrari is so bad. It shouldn't have been anywhere near the podium. And had the race planned out as normal, he would have been really far behind, really far behind in the order. So yeah, the race came to him and he maximised it. He drove brilliantly. It's like Gasly in the AlphaTauri. He got absolutely everything out of it. Sebastian Vettel didn't do that. Okay, yeah, we know he was struggling with the car, but it was just terrific from Leclerc. That move on Perez as well, it was right on the edge. It was almost Daniel Ricciardo-esque from a couple of years ago at the Red Bull. It was brilliant. He didn't make a mistake. I mean, he said that he hadn't been driving brilliantly on Friday. It was kind of weird. I was like, well, what's happened here, Leclerc? You're Ferrari's future. You got your mega contract, and yet Vettel's comfortably quicker on the flying lap pace, on the long run pace, and then he turned it around for qualifying. And yeah, I think he actually saved some blushes for Ferrari with his qualifying performance. But to come away with second place in that car for Ferrari, 10 out of 10 for Leclerc.
With everything else that was going on, it almost took away from our race winner, Valtteri Bottas, in terms of just how good a job he did this weekend.
It's fundamentally flawed, but understandably flawed driver rating system that we have, because we're almost grading the drivers ever so slightly differently because of how good we know their car is and things like that. And Bottas gets a 9 because of that Q3 off. He should have been even faster. He should have been even more ahead in terms of pole position. And it ended up having quite catastrophic consequences for his team, because his teammate was following him and he then ends up falling back and things like that. And ultimately that probably affects the 1-2 they should have had. I know there was a reliability concern and the safety cars and things like that are obviously different, but it would have been it could have been a hell of a lot different race if he doesn't make that error. And also, again, there remains a question mark about his pace at the end of that first stint. His soft tyres, when he came in under the safety car, looked absolutely ragged. Now, he says he was managing it, he was in control, even when the gap was coming down. It was just him making sure he could get to his target pit stop, which would have been around about another 10 laps further in than when the safety car came out. But it was just that little off that costs him, just because he makes a mistake, whereas Leclerc didn't. That's why he gets a 9.
But that's how we've ranked the drivers for this weekend. As we've been saying, we want to know what you think at home. Do you agree with what Alex and I have been discussing about, or do you completely disagree and think we've got it all wrong? Which could be the case, but we would like to think we haven't. We're going to look at what you guys think, how that matches up. Make sure you're going over to Autosport.com and ranking the drivers as you see it. Make sure you are subscribing to the YouTube channel. There's going to be tons more content coming out every single week, all to do with Formula One and more. And make sure you give this video a like, a comment, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.